Alright, so there is a camera that people have been losing their over for the past few years, and that camera is the Sony FX3. And this video is not about that camera. This one is about the Sony FX30. And while I absolutely agree that the FX3 is an insane camera, there are so many reasons why people should not be sleeping on the FX30. Now, I bought it a little over a year ago, and I told a bunch of people back then, before I even bought it, that I had a feeling that this would be the last personal camera I buy for a really long time. I'll explain exactly what that means in a second, but now, a year and some change later, I fully stand behind that statement. I absolutely love this camera, and I'm not usually someone who gets attached to camera gear, but the FX30 is maybe my one exception to that rule. And I'm not gonna spend a bunch of time talking about the specs on this thing because I feel like there are enough videos out there already that cover this sort of stuff. And even though, in my opinion, the specs on this camera are really good, they're not the main thing that I care about. Alright, there is a lot that I want to say about this camera, but I think that it's probably a good idea to start off by giving you some context in terms of what I've been shooting with it. And I have pretty much used it for everything. Client work, personal stuff for YouTube, behind the scenes for friends' projects, events, travel. And when I say that it is the last personal camera that I'm gonna buy, what I mean is that it's a camera that perfectly fits what I need right now from a camera that I actually own. I can comfortably use it on personal projects, but I can also comfortably use it on small to medium budget client work as well. And I never feel like anything is missing. It is just an insanely capable camera. And considering the price that you pay for it, which I'm sure I'm gonna mention a bunch of times throughout this video, it is kind of absurd. Like, it almost feels wrong that it is this affordable. It feels like you're scamming Sony by buying a camera that is packed with so many great features at this price. Now, I want to start out by quickly talking about the image quality coming out of this camera, because I know that a lot of people complained about it a bunch when it first came out, and to be completely honest, I have no idea why that is. I have absolutely zero complaints about the footage coming out of this camera. There is a 26 megapixel APS-C sensor in here that shoots in 6K and downsamples it to 4K. The dynamic range that you can get from it is very impressive. Yes, it is a smaller sensor, it's got certain drawbacks, but if you take the time to understand what they are, I don't think that that's an issue in the slightest, because you can work around them pretty easily. And just in general, if you know what you're doing, the images that you're able to get are beautiful. I mean, the way that your footage looks is gonna depend on a bunch of other stuff outside of just the sensor. If you're using glass that's very sharp and clinical, your footage is also gonna look that way, but you can also use some vintage glass that has more character, and the sensor is gonna be able to keep up with that just fine as well. Maybe one thing that you want to look out for is what frame rate you're shooting in, because while 24 and 60 have no crop and look great, if you're gonna be shooting in 120, there is a 1.6 times crop, and depending on the situation, that can look a little weird. But if you make sure to give it enough light, that also looks perfectly fine. I'm gonna be completely honest, ever since I got this camera, I've probably shot in 120 FPS like 2 or 3 times in a year, so the way that it looks isn't really something that I care about much, but still, I genuinely think that the image quality coming from the FX30 keeps up super well with some other cameras that are much more expensive. And aside from the great sensor, there are a few other things that play into that. One of them is S-Log3, which is a big reason that I wanted to upgrade to the FX30 from my A6400, which I still have, by the way. I'm able to push it a lot more and get some looks that I feel like are a lot harder to achieve using S-Log2 footage. The colors look great and hold up really well to some pretty heavy color grading. I'm able to get some very decent results when using stuff like the built-in Resolve film look effect or something like Dehancer. But if I want to keep things looking more natural, I'm also able to do that super easily. At first, I was a little worried that there would be a huge learning curve to color grading S-Log3, but I actually got used to it pretty quickly, and a big part of the reason for that is that I always use Phantom LUTs when I'm color grading. Now, I've talked about Phantom LUTs a bunch of times before, and I actually have a full video where I show you how I use them with the footage coming from my A6400, my FX30, but I also use them for stuff that I shoot with my iPhone. They are one of the main reasons that I'm able to get results that I'm super happy with, specifically from the FX30, really easily. But in general, I have just gotten used to working with S-Log3, and at this point, I have been super happy with what I've been able to get from it. Now, something else I want to talk about that's kind of related to the image quality is the dual base ISO. That is also a big reason that made me upgrade to the FX30 from my A6400, and I've heard a lot of people get butthurt saying that the dual base on the FX30 isn't good and that it's pointless. And I honestly have no idea what the f they're talking about. Maybe I just have my rose-colored glasses on, but I personally love this feature. In my mind, that makes this camera so much more usable across different situations. And I know that a lot of people talk about how 2500 is very noisy as a second base, but I actually think that most of the people complaining about that just have absolutely no clue whatsoever how to correctly expose S-Log3 to begin with, and that's where the issue comes from. Like, I've had the opportunity to use it in all sorts of different lighting conditions, and again, as long as you know what you're doing, I think it is completely fine. Hell, if you understand how to expose your footage, I've shot at 12,800 and I've gotten some perfectly usable images. Would I like it if the second base was a little higher? Sure. Maybe something like 4,000 would be nice, but I also don't think that 2,500 is too low. You just gotta know what you're doing. Something else I have heard a lot of people complain about that I think is ridiculous after using this camera over the past year is the APS-C or Super 35 sensor. I know it's technically not Super 35, but bear with me. Like, this might hurt some feelings, but I really don't give a shit. I genuinely think that a huge portion of the people who go for full frame sensor cameras are mindless drones who do it purely because of the hype and not because they actually need full frame. Just to be clear, if you're someone who is well aware of the benefits of full frame over Super 35 and you need those specific benefits for your work, by all means, get full frame. But I have talked to so many people, both online and in person, who give the stupidest explanations about why they're dropping extra money on a bigger sensor. Like, I can guarantee that you have watched so many films and TV shows in your lifetime that have been filmed on a Super 35 sensor, and you have not thought about it a single time. So if you're someone who complains about Super 35 being bad just because your favorite influencer told you so, maybe stop buying into the bullshit. Consider what your specific needs are and start thinking for yourself every now and then. Sorry, that got a little heated, but I have been keeping that in for a while. But yeah, the Super 35 sensor on the FX30 is absolutely great and I love it. I don't personally need full frame, and I have never been in a situation where something was going wrong on a shoot and having a full frame camera would have saved it. Now, something else that I think is worth talking about are the ergonomics of the camera, which is a big thing for me. A camera can be an absolute technical marvel, and if the ergonomics are garbage, I will not even look at it. There was a time when my eyes would light up looking at a spec sheet, but nowadays I want the shape of the camera to be nice and the buttons to be where I want them to be, because every camera is good nowadays, and there's more than just specs that I want to care about, and the FX30 is just like that. almost. There are a few things that I kind of dislike, and one of them is the position of the joystick. I don't think that it should be on the top. I think it would be much better if it was on the back, and since it's on the top, I don't use it nearly as much as I wish I did. That is one thing that I still haven't really gotten used to. Aside from that, everything just makes sense. It's got record buttons in key places that are pretty useful. There are recording indicator lights where it matters. It's got enough buttons all around in easy to reach places that you can customize, though I do wish that the custom buttons were just labeled as C1, C2, and so on, instead of having the default functions written out next to them, because I have pretty much changed all of them, and if I hand the camera to someone else, they almost always assume that I haven't, and I gotta explain what they're set to. Not a big deal, but it is just something that I've thought about. One more thing that I love about the FX30 that sort of ties into the ergonomics is how versatile it can be. I made a video a while back where I talked about my favorite FX30 accessories and the way that I rig everything up, but one of the best things about this camera is that you don't need to rig it up if you don't want to. There are a bunch of cameras out there that rely on being set up with a ton of accessories in order to actually be usable, and the FX30 isn't like that. When I need to for like a client project, I can set it up with a bigger, more complicated rig with handles, a monitor, a V-mount battery and stuff, and you can have a look at all of those things either in the full rig video that I made or in the description, but I can also just grab the camera, put a lens on it, grab an ND filter, and be able to shoot some awesome looking footage with no issues, and I love that. I love that it doesn't require you to carry a bunch of stuff with you everywhere if you want to use it properly, but it's also super easy to rig it out if you need to. And that's a big thing when I bring it with me when I'm traveling. Like, for example, earlier this year, I went to Portugal with my girlfriend for about a week, and I intentionally decided to bring as little camera gear with me as possible. So I only brought the FX30, my Tamron 17-70, my Freewell V2 filter, a small on-camera mic, and some batteries and a charger. I also had my iPhone with me, but that's whatever. Specifically when it comes to the FX30, for that entire week, there was not a single time when I felt like anything was missing. Not once that I have the feeling that there was an accessory that I needed in order to make my shooting experience better. And that's one more thing that I love about it. And I fully understand that you're able to do this with other compact mirrorless cameras. This isn't exclusive to the FX30, but I still think that it's crazy that something that's this portable and easy to travel with can give you such great looking images while also being this affordable. And something that helps out a lot with the portability aspect of this camera is that the battery life on it is great, at least in my experience. Now, I know some people have mentioned that they have had issues with poor battery life, but that's not something that I've run into so far. I've got a total of 3 batteries for it, one original Sony one and 2 from SmallRig. I did also recently add a SmallRig VB99 SE battery to my gear collection, which has been great, but even with just the standard NPF 100 or whatever batteries, I have never run out of power on a shoot. I've been able to comfortably go a full day of shooting with just those 3 batteries. Granted, it's not like I'm recording non-stop for the entire day, but there have been moments when it's almost like that. For example, not long after I got the FX30 around the end of last year, I went to Cornwall with a few friends to help them out with a project that they were filming. And I was there to help out in general, but mainly to shoot behind the scenes of the entire thing. And we were there for about a week, and I would pretty much shoot from before sunrise to after sunset on and off every day. Now, I obviously did have to charge my batteries occasionally, but there was never a single time when one battery would run out and I didn't have another full one ready to go. And I think that is pretty impressive considering the conditions that I was filming in on that trip were far from ideal for battery life. And not only that, but they just weren't ideal to be using a camera in general. There were like 1 or 2 days when the weather was kind of okay for a few hours with clear skies and it wasn't super cold, but for the most part, it was cold, rainy, and windy almost all of the time. And aside from the batteries holding up well, the camera itself took it like an absolute champ. Now, I gotta be honest, man, I was nervous anytime when I had to bring out the camera because I had just bought it like a month before, and it would have sucked if I ruined it on my first bigger filming trip. And I obviously did my best to pack it away when it was raining harder. I would keep it on a strap under my raincoat, but I also did bring it out and filmed when I had to because that is what I was there to do. And I just hoped that it would be okay. And it was. Like, I know that it's supposed to be weather sealed, but I cannot stress enough just how much rain, wind, and sand there was most of the time, but I just made sure to dry it off and clean it whenever we were in the car traveling between locations, and at the end of each day, it was still working completely fine. So durability wise, the FX30 is a tank, and that is one more really important thing for me. I don't normally shoot in extreme conditions, but knowing that if I have to, it can handle them, at least to some extent, makes me feel better. Also, a big reason that I'm super happy with the FX30 is because I have been in the E-mount system forever, and I got to keep using all of the glass that I already had with it. And it's kind of in line with that, a big reason that I keep saying this is the last personal camera I'm gonna buy for a really long time is that there are so many great lenses for E-mounts, and there are so many more that can be adapted to it from other mounts. And if you're able to pair this camera with some good glass, you're gonna have no issues working around the technical limitations of a smaller sensor. And considering the price tag of the camera itself, who knows, you might have some money left over exactly for lenses, which are gonna be very important anyways. Now, one more thing that I have to talk about, because it has been super helpful to me, is the ability to import my own LUTs. Like I said earlier, I always use Phantom LUTs when color grading, but I also use them internally in my camera to monitor what my starting point will look like later when I start grading. So the fact that I can have them in the FX30 means that I don't always have to rely on an external monitor for that sort of thing, which again helps with portability. And aside from just using Phantom LUTs in camera, the option to import LUTs also gave me the ability to add false colors to the FX30, which is not a feature that it has by default. Some of you might have seen the video already, but I basically just made some false color LUTs that I then imported, and now I'm able to monitor my exposure using one more tool. So you can check those out if you want to. They are free, but you also have the option to pay whatever you want if you feel like you want to support the channel. And there are a few other clever ways that you can use this function, which I might cover down the line, but we will have to wait and see. Now, I know that I've pretty much only talked about stuff that I like about the FX30, and that's because honestly, while planning for this video, I couldn't think of almost anything that I dislike. The closest thing that gets to that are the port doors on the side of the camera, which are plastic, and when you open them up and you plug something in, they get in the way of the monitor turning all the way. Would it be better if they were rubber? Yeah, probably. Is it something that would turn me away from this camera? Absolutely not. I just had to bring up something negative so that you don't feel like I'm gassing Sony up, which I am absolutely doing because they knocked it out of the park with this camera. So with all that said, I still can't stress just how great the value of this camera is relative to the price. And I honestly can't think of any other camera that offers this much while being this affordable. The image quality, the color, the codecs, the autofocus, the IBIS, the form factor, the lens options, it has it all. And at this point, the camera has been out for a good bit of time too, meaning that you can probably find some awesome secondhand deals on it. And if you are able to find a good deal on one, do yourself a favor and do not sleep on this camera. But as a final note to this video, I fully realize that the FX30 is technically not the best camera. And even after talking about some of the specs of it, as well as some of the real world aspects of using it, there is one thing that I think this camera does for me better than any other one that I've used so far. And that's the fact that it's a camera that makes me excited to use it. Every single time I reach for this camera, I am excited to turn it on and see what I'm able to create with it. And regardless if it's something that I like or dislike, the process of creating with it is something that I find super enjoyable. I don't know what the exact reason is for this. Maybe it's a combination of all of the things that I've talked about so far, plus all of the ones that I might have forgot to mention. Or maybe it's just some weird part of my subconscious that clicks with it. I don't know. But I can tell you that I've had the opportunity to use some much more expensive and premium cameras that don't do that for me. But yeah, I absolutely think that the FX30 is my favorite camera right now, and I honestly don't see that changing anytime soon. Like, I don't mind testing out other cameras just to see how they work and to stay in the loop of what's out there, but over the past year, there hasn't been a single time when I've used another camera and have found a good enough reason to make me even consider switching away from my FX30. So I'm gonna do my best to take care of this camera for as long as I can, and I really believe that it's gonna be able to do everything that I needed to for a very long time. And if there just so happens to be a reason for me to use a different one, I will just rent it, do what I need to, and then not worry about it. So if you've also been considering picking up a Sony FX30 and you've done enough research to feel like it's the right camera for you, I highly encourage you to go ahead and get one. I genuinely believe that it has been one of the best value cameras out there ever since it was released, and I honestly think that is going to be the case for the next 2 or 3 years at least, if not more. And I don't think that you can go wrong with it. All right, cool. So if you've got any questions, drop them below, but that is going to be it for this one. I'll talk to you in the next one.